Okay, ladies and gentlemen, by my reckoning, it's 2 o'clock. So I think we're going to start this meeting at this point. So welcome to a meeting that was promised on the day of the shareholder meeting. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there's one thing I'm going to do, and that's mute something. Bear with me a second. I think we're going to start this meeting at this point. So welcome. That was weird, hearing myself being repeated a few seconds afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the first slide, and before I go any further, I'm going to invite Chairman John Snell just to say a few introductory words. But as I say, what we're doing today is describing our plan, the vision thing, until the year 2030. It is our formal plan for development, and essentially it becomes the umbrella under which all developments at the railway will be managed. So in other words, as we develop the railway, anything that we do to the railway forms part of the 2030 plan. Now, that is not designed to close off opportunities. We still acknowledge the requirement for agility, but essentially we've got to have a vision as to where we want to be. Now, this is also associated with a document for which the link I shall be publishing after we have completed this meeting. And we're going to be describing 3 types of things, and that is enablers, sustainers, and ad hoc development. So enablers is all about giving the infrastructure to allow us to build the business. Sustainers are allowing to keep the business going and growing, and ad hoc is where there may be some opportunities which we want to respond to. Now, I'm going to start with a government health warning before I hand over to John for a minute. And it's this. This presentation contains over 50 slides. So we've got a lot to get through, but 2 comments on that. The first comment is the reason we have 50 slides is due to the passion of the people involved wanting to get the message across. And therefore, it would not be right to cut people back with what they want to say, because we have an important message that's going to be lasting us for the next decade. The second thing is, we're pretty much all of us are at home. So hopefully we're sitting in a nice comfy seat with the kitchen not too far away if we all need a brew. And we can always put the loo as well if necessary as well. So hopefully, I'm not going to make this too long, but as you can imagine, 50 slides deserves a certain degree of time to manage it properly. But in turn, you know, we may take a break, or if you feel like just stepping away for a few minutes, and indeed if you have to leave early, remember this meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed and therefore being saved on YouTube as well. So we can always come back to it. So I'm going to take us to the agenda, and John Snell, would you like to just give us a short introductory chat, please?
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is effectively a continuation of the AGM, the bit that was the non-statutory part of the meeting, which we've extended to a much wider membership than would have been the AGM alone. But firstly, a word about how this has actually happened. There was a catalyst for this 10-year plan, and it was called John Stokes. Back in 2nd of June, John put out an email commenting on the work that was being done by Martin Miller in highlighting past achievements and saying, where are we going in the future? And John was dead right. The board was very heavily committed in the middle of June with actually issues to keep the railway alive, functioning and solvent. And consequently, we were not looking over the horizon at all. Now, it's a bit like the old joke about alligators and swamps. And I realized that John hit a very pertinent point, and I put a very hasty plan for first consideration for the board meeting about 6 days after John's email, and the directors took it up and ran with it very well. During 2020, we actually had 31 board meetings, which shows that the focus was in staying alive. But in that period, the directors went forward and developed those basic points into what you're going to get today, which are on a much higher level than the original headings. But this is essentially a plan of what we want to do to make the railway interesting, viable and profitable. It doesn't go into too much of the money side at this stage. It's the vision of what we want to get to by 2030. So no more from me. I hand back straight to Neil so he can get into the meat of the issue.
Thank you, John. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we're going to spend a small amount of time reviewing 2020 vision. Now, that was our earlier 10-year plan that was launched in 2012, and that itself was launched post the full reopening of the line to Duffield. And I compared it at that time to what I call moon landing syndrome, in the sense that, like the moon landing, there was one wonderful moment when everything came right. We'd achieved our objectives and there was a great cause for celebration. But then afterwards, a bit like with every party, I speak from bitter experience from last weekend and the thumping hangover I had on Sunday, there's always the day after. And there's always like, what now? And it's what I christen moon landing syndrome, because I remember, because I think there are quite a few mature faces in this audience that probably many of you remember the moon landings in 1969. It was a wonderful time, but there was a slight element of the party's over now. It's all become a bit dull and a bit sort of a bit lackluster. So the purpose of 2020 vision was to give us a plan through to last year. So that's the first thing we're going to discuss. We're then going to look at the 2030 plan, which, for lacking of any particular imagination, I've just called the vision thing, but really you can call it whatever you want to do. Then in turn, we're going to look at the immediate future, because Mike Evans, who I don't think is on the call at the moment, but I know will be joining us, he's retiring at the end of September. So that brings to a close a period of the past 20 years where two very strong individuals, Martin Miller and then Mike Evans, were steering the ship. And that has led to the board having to have a very frank assessment of how it wants to run the business in the future. So again, that is an important thing. And as we shall see with contributions from other colleagues, that the world has changed a great deal in 20 years and we have to respond with it. And then finally, there will be a brief question and answer session. I've received some questions and we will have responses to those. If time permits, we might be able to do some extras, but we'll see how time and patience goes on. So that's the plan. So 2020 Vision, as I say, was introduced in the year 2012. It was initially a short-term plan for the next 2 to 3 years and a framework to take us what was then the medium term, now seems like quite nostalgia, out to 2020, and to give a little bit of a view for this decade. And there's Iris the rail car with her binoculars looking into the future. It was a planning process to take us into the 2020s. And this particular slide, and again, don't worry if you can't read the absolute detail of it, but this was from an update in about 2017, and no, earlier than that, 2015. And what we can see here, excuse me, is some of the priorities that we had. So priority one at that point, get the platform at Shottle completed. And we forget now that that lovely tarmac platform that we have at Shottle Station was actually a bit dangerous before we started, with a low platform edge and really quite an unsafe and unsuitable surface. We did it. The maintenance facility, the picture there that you can just see, we forget now the maintenance facility only had 2 roads in it. There was no lighting when we started. I remember being guard as we took a DMU in there at night in the pitch black. God knows what could have been in our way. Unfortunately, we were okay. We now have a maintenance facility that needs further expansion, but nonetheless now has carriage jacks, will shortly have locomotive jacks, has a concrete floor for some of it, and ultimately we'll have it for all of the area. So again, it's easy to forget where we've moved on. The Duffield building. We now have an absolutely first-class building. Thank you to Everett and the team who built that. Initially, our only building was a hut that we had inherited from Vodafone, which was when there used to be a mobile phone tower on the platform. And that then moved to the opposite side of the line. The hut was vacated, and that initially was our only home. That hut is now the toilet block, and next to it now is the Duffield Station building, which is a very welcoming place indeed. Probably the only one we haven't done from back in about 2015 was the third pit. And that really is now coming under the whole area of the new steam shed. And again, that's something that Mr. Hills will be discussing a little bit later on in the presentation. So looking at just for that random selection of 4 items, we hit 75% of them. If we go into a little bit more detail, and I'll remind you again that don't worry if you can't read all that, there's not going to be a test at the end of this, and you will be getting a copy of this presentation or watching the recording. But as you can see there, some of the areas where, for example, passengers, we forget that back in 2014, 2015, the hiring of a steam locomotive for the peak season was seen as being an ambition. We now have 2 mainline standard steam locomotives based here, and we have 2 further mainline standard locomotives that are getting pretty close now to completion. Ravenstore, well, we've got Ravenstore running. I think that's probably one area where we're going to be looking to do some more development, to be quite frank. Santa, what can I say? Anybody who had any exposure to last year's Santa, remember that today we're now running a summer pantomime, but back then, we had a much smaller affair. So now we have a really big and an essential revenue stream coming from Santa, and we're already selling tickets for this year. Wirksworth, we have a new station building. We still have the other half to complete, but we've already got trading taking place in that one. And of course, Duffield is trading as well. Experiences, we've brought those in. They're now becoming a pretty significant part of revenue and certainly a growth area for the next 2 to 3 years, both with steam locomotives and also with diesel. We had delivery of that Class 47 just about a month and a half ago. And there's a very exciting locomotive due to come next year as well. So every one of those gives us the opportunity to expand our revenue. And that's something that we'll discuss a great deal more shortly. And in turn, catering. Catering has grown and has grown considerably. And that again ties into experiences. And I speak from personal experience. Last week, I had my birthday party and I had about 30 guests. We had a 3-course meal on it. It was absolutely excellent with a first-class team supporting us as well. Proper waiting at table service, drinks, on-train bar. And that was just with 1 carriage in operation. When the LMSCA complete their 2nd carriage, and we probably bring one of those L&ER carriages in, we have the ability to expand that further. Testing. I see a huge opportunity for more testing taking place this year. Let's not forget, this year, the first hybrid passenger train for the UK received its first testing here at the EVR. And I was one of a few people who had the pleasure of actually travelling down the line in a Turbo Star powered by battery. And then if we look at land, which again is something to come back to, the very important thing is that we now own the freehold of the railway. And the only exception to that is one patch of land at Wirksworth Station, which is the former strategic freight site. And that itself is really effectively now locked off from further development. So there's no danger, June, of there being a Tesco being plonked there or anything like that. And again, it's something that we'll be coming back to. And that's very important. We have a solid asset. Of course, the downside is we've now got 120 structures to maintain. So the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, both through maintenance and depreciation, but it is our own line. If we just look at that in retrospect, therefore, we met most of our objectives: station buildings, catering, premium offerings, and also expanding our locomotive and carriage fleets as well, which is another thing we'll be coming on to. We grabbed some opportunities at Shottle. We have a loop there now. We also have a signal box that has not only now been installed in position, but now thanks to our team down there, Tony Watt and John Sylvester and Hilton, we now have the bottom half cladded. And again, Ian Allison will be talking to us a little bit about the future plans for there. We grabbed the freehold. We've not been perfect. One of the biggest areas that has certainly exercised my mind the most in the past 3 or 4 years has been the administration of the railway. We still have what our new financial controller, Matthew Sutcliffe, said to me is, we have a sole trader finance mindset. There's still a slight element of working on the equipment. We just got a pile of £20 notes and we just sort of hand them out. Now, that needs to change, and it is changing quite rapidly. We need to get Wirksworth Station building complete. We need, first of all, to get a satisfactory agreement between Wyvern Rail and Evra about the ownership and operation of the building. And then from that as well, we then need to get on with building the second half of the station building. And I'm going to be a little bit inwards focused here. Do we have more vehicles in space? Do we now need to look at our fleet and determine whether we have, in some cases, the wrong mix of vehicles? And that's going to be a difficult decision that we will have to take over time. There's no need for immediate concern or panic, but it's something that, again, forms part of a growing railway. Okay, let's take us into 2030. I think that picture speaks a great deal for itself to begin with. That's taken at Shottle with a signal at Clear. If you look into the distance, you can see the junction there. It's Shottle South Junction, and the signal, the bracket signal in place, ready to be activated. You can just about see to the right the down platform at Shottle, which isn't getting as much use as it should do. So again, that's another area where we need to consider. But it just felt like a good picture to pull in here. Now, importantly, everything I'm describing to you is in the document which I shall share with you after this meeting. Some of you already have it. That is our actual white paper that describes our plan to 2030 and beyond, and includes a great deal of narrative about a vision for how we see our visitors joining us in under a decade's time. But let's start with the 5 principal objectives between now and 2030. So the first one is to develop further our on-train offering to include dining and other value-added services. So what do we mean by this? Well, let's be quite frank. Selling day return tickets on the railway doesn't really make money. All the additional revenue, the cream on the top of the cake, comes from retail, catering, and experiences. But to provide those, we need to have the infrastructure and the people in place. So we see there as on-train dining and other experiences to be an essential part of our business. The second thing is to revisit our mytesttrack.com business and see how we can start to expand the offering in a more formal manner. HS2 has begun. In a way, it's still in early stages. The fact remains is there is a strong prediction within the industry that there will be a lot of new entrants to the rail industry, a lot of requirements for testing and also for employee training. We are located just up the road from Derby. We're probably the closest heritage line to Derby that there is, and we are in a strong position to exploit that, provided we are able to dedicate the right resources, mostly that's people, to actually go out and sell the business. The next thing is to consolidate our coaching stock fleet and provide a reliable range of steam locomotives for haulage. And we're a long way down there. We have a lot of carriages at the railway at the moment. Some are operational, some are partially operational, others are what we would call long-term prospects. The days of acquiring Mark I coaches pretty much for buttons and to get them in running condition on day one are long gone. The last loco hauled Mark I coaches were withdrawn 25 years ago. The last EMUs were withdrawn about 20 years ago, maybe slightly less. So there is a very strong and active competitive market for Mark I carriages. So in a lot of cases, we do have to get what we can and then put them through our own shops and restore them ourselves. Importantly as well, we have the LMSCA with us, and the work they've done on that Break Third is absolutely superb. And we know that the Third Open, which of course was in service back in 2011 before the very sad fire, will make a fantastic dining set. And we have at least one LMER set available, or coach available to us as well. So we have a good mix. And the irony is that in the past, it's been open coaches that are most desirable for heritage lines. And yet with COVID, we were very fortunate to have a large proportion of compartment stock. Or Harry Potter coaches, as people who are non-railway enthusiasts now see them. And again, that's worth knowing. So they do have a genuine appeal. So our fourth objective, to provide the infrastructure to support the line's operations. And that is absolutely everything from making sure that the existing infrastructure that we have, the track and the structures that go over and underneath the line, are available and in serviceable condition. It is also to provide the right facilities for our passengers, our customers, and also importantly, our maintenance people as well, to be able to restore and maintain our rolling stock and locomotives. And finally, to build for ourselves a financial buffer to protect the railway from financial shocks. Now, we've been very fortunate in the last year, and I thank Mike Evans for the work he has done in chasing loans and importantly grants that have helped tide the railway through during the COVID epidemic. But in turn, it exposes to the fact that we need to start building some form of a financial buffer. So if something falls down or something breaks, we are in a position where we can call on ready cash to protect our position. A lot of other railways have found themselves in similar places. And there's a very strong movement for heritage lines where possible to start to build some form of a financial buffer. We also have a vision. You've got to have a vision. 7 points. What are they? So first of all, booking systems, closer linked to social media and platforms. Why can't Visit Peak District or something like that also be able to provide a booking to our services automatically? And in turn, why not be able to tell when people visit the railway, know who they are, pick up the information about them? Other organisations are doing this. There's no reason why we can't take advantage of those same opportunities. And those are comparatively low-cost enhancements. And as I'll come on to at the end of this presentation, the world is going in that direction, and we must be on the leading edge of that rather than trailing behind. And if you look at a lot of heritage railways today, some lines are very savvy, and I count ourselves as part of that. Some lines, some not too far from Worksworth, don't even have a decent website. So we need to make sure that for very low cost, we stay at the leading edge. By 2030, most cars are probably going to be hybrids or all electric. Any parking space should become a filling station. Severn Valley Railway have already beaten us to it. They have parking spaces with charging points at some of their stations. We need to be there as well. We need to be at that leading edge. If nothing else, to start bolstering our credentials. After all, what do? Fundamentally, we take solid lumps of carbon and set fire to them. So on that basis, you could say that we're not doing a lot for global warming. We're really a marginal player in that respect. But the key thing is to be able to respond to, and if possible, profit from the fact that cars in the future will tend to be electric. I've already said this, catering is an essential part of our plan. You don't make money just selling return tickets. If I look at Worksworth, we have 2, 3, 4 places where I can get lunch any day. Some of those offer evening dining. There's no reason why the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway cannot be one of those options for evening dining. Slightly different. You don't normally have to run down the track chasing the restaurant, but within the niche that we're in, we have a strong ability to build our business in that area. And it is relatively high margin business. It's a cliche, but it's true. Exit through the gift shop. Every attraction should make sure that as people leave the railway, they are funneled through, or possibly arrival, the gift shop. We need to make sure we have an attractive range of products that appeal not only to Dad, the train spotter, I'm being very sexist and ageist here, I know, but also to Mum, and maybe to Gran and Grandad as well. So we need to make sure that those high margin products, again, are on sale. The picture you see there, that is the Welsh Highland Railways terminal at Carnarvon, and is quite a spectacular shop. And we've got to look at what we sell. If you take a look there, I can see some pretty mermaids. There are children's toys. There are enthusiast books at the far end, the whole range of knickknacks. We need to get more savvy with our retail offering. Retailing itself is a skill, and it's something that I think we need to improve a great deal on. We must make sure that we have accessible rolling stock. The sheer embarrassment of somebody who comes in a mobility scooter or a wheelchair and they're shunted into the guard's van like so much luggage. We have an excellent accessible carriage with the brake third courtesy of the LMSCA, with those double doors and space, which means anybody who is mobility impaired can access the carriage and be part of everybody else travelling in it. And you don't have to be mobility impaired to be in a wheelchair. I'm thinking about my mother-in-law, who is of a certain age, and having those wide double doors was a great assistance to a lady who is also partially sighted as well. So it is important that as much as we have traditional 1950s rolling stock, we have the accessibility of the 21st century. We also need to develop our intermediate stations. Shottle might be the home of a diesel depot. I hope so. We try and talk to the people who own peak oil and very gently sort of tread round them to see if we can get a little bit of extra land off them. We're going very carefully there. But also Shottle is an attraction. It's in a good location. It's on the Belper to Ashbourne Road. There's a pub less than 5 minutes walk from it. It's our crossing point. There's a signal box. Now, if you think of a line like the Severn Valley, which when it first opened, Bewdley to Bridgenorth, was not a great deal longer than our own. They had intermediate stations, still do, at Hampton Load, Arley and Highley. And gradually, every one of those has developed into an attraction in its own right. Highley has a museum. So what can we do with our intermediate stations, Shottle and potentially Idridge Hay, to actually make them a destination rather than just an inconvenience running from Wirksworth down to Duffield? We have assets. We need to think how we can make better use of them. And finally, we know that we can run more than one train on our line, but it's very complex and very tricky. We need to have an easy ability to cross trains at Shottle, which doesn't just work for galas. It can also apply to testing. So it allows us to easily split the line into two halves. And in turn, we need better flexibility for operation at Wirksworth. We have 3 platforms at Wirksworth, and very often all the trains run out of one platform. So the more we can do to provide that flexibility, the easier it is for us to offer a more varied offering to our customers. So 5 objectives, a 7-point vision. Let's now start to look at some of the detail. We have 7 core items that we regard as being our priorities. The first one, the construction, the new steam shed, and with a visitor centre. We've always had a long-term view that if we have a shed, we should also have the ability for visitors to observe the goings-on safely and without having to resort to high-vis and all the rest of it. We need a steam shed. At the moment, we're pretty much operating our steam services in what looks like a shanty town. Not only is it insecure, it's not particularly safe. Nobody could call it best practice. We need to complete Wirksworth Station building. We need a proper cafe. The Gatwick Express set has done incredibly well, considering that's been here now for nearly 20 years. But it's starting to fall apart. On-train catering is an art, and if you can avoid it, you should do. So the ability to build a proper cafe, restaurant, and have proper catering services not only makes it easier for people at Wirksworth to have a meal or snack, but also it means the preparation of meals for on-train catering becomes a great deal easier as well. We need a diesel depot, preferably at Shottle. It's a good out-of-the-way location. I, for one, have had to deal a great deal recently with neighbours who, quite understandably, don't like the fumes and the tooting and the ticking over and noise of diesel locomotives. As marvellous as some of them are, I have to sympathise with those people, even though sometimes they do make my life a little challenging. So the ability not only to build a diesel depot at Shottle gives us the ability to have some out of the way, but it also helps expand Shottle as an attraction in its own right. We need those signal boxes. Shuttle first, and I think probably the target for them is about 2023, 2024, but also Worksworth. And again, Ian Allison may be able to give us a little bit of insight as to how we're hoping that we may have found a box for Worksworth as well. We need to extend our platforms. Speaking as a guard, operating at Duffield is quite challenging. The station is on quite a tight curve. We've extended the platform to the north, but with 6 coaches, the driver can't see the guard. Now, fortunately, these days we use walkie-talkies, but it makes it difficult. So one option at Duffield as well is to move the buffer stops and the run-round loop a little bit further south. But in the meantime, the ability to extend our platforms to cope with 5 or 6 coach trains on a routine basis is going to be essential. And then finally, tying in with what we're saying about catering and our offering, the ability to have a standalone vintage dining set that's all set up, linked to the cafe, which becomes the preparation and the cooking area, and in turn also the ability to clean effectively and securely, again, is a priority. So it becomes a dedicated location where the dining set is located. So those are our 7 core items. But you can't get to these exciting things without doing some of the other stuff, and some of it can be quite boring. So some of the things we need to do are boring but necessary. They are the enablers for the railway. First one, Mr. Evans, I believe that Mr. Allison may have mentioned this in passing on 1 or 2 occasions, that he'd like an electrical supply at Shuttle. We need that because at most of our stations, there is either no electrical supply or a very meagre one. For Shuttle, if we're going to have a signal box, we need a decent power supply. And actually, we also need at some point to expand the capabilities at Worksworth if we want to put in charging points. We need to change the access to Duffield Station. We continually receive calls from whoever's opening up there saying somebody's parked across the entrance. And at the moment, it's a gate in a palisade fence. It looks like you're entering a prison camp. Now, the plans are afoot, and Mr. Shone will be discussing them to actually create a far more appealing entrance to Duffield Station. So that's very important indeed. We need to extend the run-around loop at Duffield. As I said before, the buffers are a little bit too far north, because when you then allow for the space for the head shunt for the locomotive, and then the space for the clearing point for the points, it means a hauled train has to stop halfway down the platform with at least 1, sometimes 2 carriages hanging off the edge of the platform. If we are able to extend the line a bit further, it means we can bring the whole train into the platform, and that will make life a lot easier, both operationally, but also from a point of view of the customer experience, because at the moment everyone has to get off and traipse down the platform. We need to consider, and I look and thank my colleagues at EVR for this, but we need to look at alternative sources of energy that Worksworth and Shuttle. The obvious one, and I know that this is now proceeding, is solar panels on the maintenance shed at Worksworth. Those will help alleviate our horrendous electricity bill, and under certain circumstances, actually put a little bit of electricity back into the grid for a pittance. But again, it forms part of the fact that we are entering a different future when it comes to energy, and we should be part of that. The other option is to look at heat pumps, but I will most definitely defer to my colleagues at EVR because they seem to understand all about those, and it leaves me a bit stuck. We need to make sure that we can service 2 sets of Mark I carriages. At the moment, like when we were doing our gala a couple of weeks ago for diesels, we're still having to use a hauled DMU as our other rolling stock set. And it does the job, but it's not ideal. So to have two sets also gives us operational flexibility, because it means we can have one set out of action being cleaned or undergoing routine maintenance while the other set is in use, and then we swap them around. It also reduces the wear on the sets as well, if you're not having the same carriages going up and down the line every day. Now, those carriages are no longer thundering down the main line at 70 miles an hour and covering possibly 1,000 miles in a day. They're probably only covering 80 or 100 miles a day, but nonetheless, they do wear. And if we can ease that wear out across two sets, it does reduce our maintenance burden. And as mentioned before, the acquisition of 4 serviceable whole-line steam locomotives, and certainly when Catherine and the Duke are returned to service, if we still have those 2 locomotives, the standard tank and the pannier available, then we will have already met that requirement. But in turn, what we need to do is make certain that we have a source of locomotives, because these locomotives tend to move around from one railway to another. We need to make sure we have a certain degree of robustness in our capabilities, so we do have something else capable to stand in for another. We then turn from the enablers, the boring stuff, the digging holes in the ground, to sustainers, keeping the lights on. We have an immediate challenge there, and that is refurbishing the bridge at Hazelwood, known to us as DJW4. We've known that's been the problem for as long as we've known this railway. And again, Ian Allison is going to be discussing with us what he proposes to do, and the work he's been doing with partners to alleviate the initial problems and look at the long-term solution. We need to refurbish the station approach and yard at Wirksworth. It's got lots of loose stones there. We had to take down the rather haphazard station approach lighting, which means at the moment we have no station approach lights, and the nights are already starting to draw in. So at some point we need to get some lights up, or else our Santa specials are going to be running in the dark, and it's not particularly safe to have a station approach with no lights at all. So that becomes quite a high priority item. We need to review our DMU fleet and make sure that what we have and what we keep is in tip-top condition. Mr. Boltby, who is in the audience here, was instrumental in obtaining a grant from the Department for Transport to turn Wirksworth into a DMU Heritage Centre, and we must continue to build on his achievement. We need to develop retail and web. I've already touched on that, but essentially we just need to be absolutely on top of how we can sell any product that we have, not only through our website, but through any other partner website as well. Going back to structures, we now own the railway. That's good news in one respect, bad news in another, because now all those bridges are our problem. So again, Mr. Allison has been working on a structures inspection regime, and also talking to partner companies in Derby about having effectively access to qualified engineers to give us any form of engineering support that we may require with any of our structures. Linked to that, we turn to the track, and certainly a priority that I know Mike Fairburn will discuss is getting hold of a tamping machine. We spend a lot of time relaying track, and then we have to spend a great deal of effort either hand tamping the track, which is back-breaking hard work, or alternatively then running trains at reduced speed for an extended period of time. So if we have a tamping machine, and whether that's either a dedicated machine or an add-on tool to go to one of our 360 machines, it's a pretty high priority. And that links into a rolling program of track renewals. It's worth remembering that a lot of the track on our line was second-hand when it came to the Wirksworth line in the early 1970s. Much of that track had already been on the Matlock to Buxton line, and when that line was sadly closed and lifted, they moved the track to the Wirksworth branch. So we're dealing with track that is probably at least 60, maybe 70 years old in places. And although they've served us well, as Ian will confirm, there's an ever-growing maintenance burden with the condition of the track that we have. And it's not just the sleepers going, it's the rails when they get worn as well. Now, if we build in a rolling renewal, that saves us from hitting the Soviet Navy sort of issue, where suddenly everything becomes obsolete at the same time. The more that we can spread the load, the better. The final part of this is to consider ad hoc developments, what I call dreams and schemes. And this shows that really we do have the capability to still be flexible about things. So, vehicle charging points. The opportunity is there. We just need to seize it when we can, or at least build in provision for charging points. We have both the narrow gauge line and a miniature railway. Those both need not only to be developed, but to think how we can bring those into things like the bringing forward of young volunteers to work them up to bigger and bigger trains, and in turn to integrate them more as part of the offering that we give. Maybe a ticket that says you have a ride on this and you also have a ride on that. Linked to that, perhaps the Ravenstor line is the ultimate miniature railway. It links up to the High Peak Trail, it links to the National Stone Centre. We need to think how best to make use of Ravenstor, because I think for a while it's possibly been the slightly forgotten part of our line, which is a shame, but understandable over the past year. A couple of personal ones from me. I still think there's room for a tea garden next to the track at Ardushay Station. Ardushay Station is a beautiful station. Ardushay is a lovely village. It also has a cracking pub just up the road. We should be trying to develop it as some form of an attraction. And I still think that fortune favours the brave. It's close. It's a key point on the Ecclesbourne Way. So there is, in my opinion, the opportunity for a tea garden at Ardushay, just to break up the monotony. Similarly at Hazelwood, there's the opportunity there to put a siding in. Again, a little opportunity, put the station back. Not the same site, probably a halt on the opposite side. This has nothing at all to do with the fact that if we opened a station at Ardushay, there would be a real ale pub within 5 minutes walk of every station. That's just a coincidence. But it'll be an attraction. And I will always keep on the list the mainline connection. Now, this is the winning the lottery option, because the mainline connection would probably cost £2 million to implement, and goodness knows how much to maintain. It may always be beyond our means, but we should never lose sight of if the opportunity presents itself through perhaps the testing business or some other scheme. Because if we could restore a mainline connection, if it was just, even if it was just a siding type connection, with a long enough head shunt, we could accept trains in and off our railway under certain circumstances. So although I always have that at the bottom of the list, it will always remain on the list just in case. And if anybody gets 6 numbers tonight, give us a call. The most important statement I want to make is this, that for the railway to develop, it must seek funding through partnerships, agility and active management. We have 2 partners. We're going to be discussing those in a minute, but there are many other partners as well, whether it be other train operating companies, engineering companies, community organisations. We need to be agile. We need to have a flexible management that can respond to things very quickly. And Mr. Tate, I think we've been quite active over the past 24 hours. All being well, there will be some filming taking place on our railway in a couple of weeks' time. And active management. And this comes down to what I'm calling the post-Mike world, where it is the role of the board of directors of Wylam Rail to become far more integrated into the day-to-day operation of the railway. So turning to partnerships, I'm now actually going to hand over to 2 of my colleagues here. because I'm going to be mentioning our two principal partners, which are the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway Association and also a little group called the EVR Trust. And to begin, Mr. Shone, are you able to speak? Over.
Yes, I can speak. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about what the EVR Trust is up to, please?
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anton Shone. I'm the Secretary of the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway Trust. Our principal focus for a long time now has been Duffield. We undertake small projects around Duffield. My colleague, Eric Boltby, who is the Treasurer of the Trust, assiduously squirrels away money he finds lying around the place. Our current major project at Duffield is to do something about the access, which has long been a difficulty. We still use what was the original BR access gate at the end of Chapel Street, and it presents a number of problems, but principally it's often obstructed by feckless people leaving their cars there. It's a tight corner, and it doesn't give a very good welcome to our railway at Duffield. So we have just fairly recently obtained planning permission from the council to put in a new access gate, and we are in negotiation with a contractor for them to provide a suitable design. The council had a number of things to say about our original design, not all of which we agree with, and we are looking to find a compromise where the gate will suit us and will suit them. They have a number of heritage issues, and Duffield is rather sensitive to the railway, perhaps a little bit more sensitive than historically Wirksworth used to be, although Wirksworth seems to have acquired some particularly sensitive people recently. So that's the plan for us for Duffield, and we will be cooperating with our colleagues in Wyvern Rail and our colleagues in the association where we can to get things moving and to assist with other projects if there's any money left over from this one. Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Anton. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Eric Hills, who is going to give a bit of an introduction from the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway Association. Eric, if you want to do a Chris Whitty and do the, can I have the next slide, please? When you're ready, I shall press the button.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Neil, and I hope you can all hear me out there. Yes, I'm Eric Hills, and I'm a trustee on the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway Association, and I hope that most of you will have heard of us. We're a major arm, a stakeholder, the charitable arm, if you like, of the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway, and we're tasked with bringing about the ability to restore, renovate, repair the various projects that come our way on the railway. In addition, we're here to raise funds, a very important aspect, of course, of keeping the railway running, and hoping that these activities that we do undertake will contribute as a stakeholder to the 2030 plan. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, the EVR charity was actually formed, as you can see from the slide, with a specific aim of promoting the restoration of the former Wirksworth to Duffield line. We believe that, as you'll hear in a minute, we have contributed to this along with the projects that have been brought our way as a result of the priorities of Wyvern Rail in the past. We've also, of course, not forgetting our branch line up to Ravenstor, which has been mentioned. And in the past, we've seen the introduction, thanks to stakeholders providing capital of a station at Ravenstor and the development of that line for usage as a historical interest and ability to come along on a day and drive a steam locomotive yourself. In the past 20 years, we've had a relationship with Wyvern Rail, a relationship which in the future we hope to develop further and support the railway. We've seen some spectacular results. We've seen one or two results that we need to work on still in the future, but one thing is certain, we will continue to do so and put the effort in to complete the priorities that are brought our way. We've had many fundraising activities that have helped us keep up this programme, but we've also been fortunate in having a number of large legacies. And indeed, one or two of these legacies, we could almost make a film out of the reasons that people have left us money. But this money has been put in successfully into the development of the railway with considerable results that you can see around, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, we can see some of the projects, and again, I'll not try and delay us too much this afternoon, but very importantly, we've seen the start of the station building, the first phase of that be completed. We have a museum and shop facilities there. We will further develop to bring about the cafe, the booking hall, and the offices which the railway so badly need, and more importantly, cover for our paying public visitors. As we all know, in Derbyshire, we can suffer from lower temperatures on some occasions. We've contributed and produced the Duffield Station building, a lovely building. I remember my early days here personally when I had to sit in an Argos shed, and that was the only roof over one's head. So a huge step forward with that building. And our volunteers and our station manager down there do a wonderful job in keeping it in tip-top condition. The restoration of 2 steam locomotives has come about. We have the 2 Bagnalls working here. We contribute obviously with moving of stock. We do the pay and plays where you can come along and members of the public can actually drive the locomotive. They'll be with us for some time and will complement the mainline locomotives that we have plans to keep and bring here in the future. The crossing keepers boxes at Gorsey Bank and Idridge Hay, both up and running now and actively increasing the ability to run trains without the necessary stops twice during the journey. Something in the past which has contributed to the journey but also delayed it in many cases. So the crossing keepers boxes are of immediate and very positive use to what we're doing. The restoration of the Mark I coaches owned by EVR, as Neil has pointed out, these coaches very often need a lot of tender loving care when they're delivered to us, a lot of work, and that will be ongoing as well as the work that we've actually achieved to keep this fleet of coaches running. Restoration of other rolling stock for the purposes of demonstrations and ongoing development of the railway, and also of course towards being able to allow our permanent way teams and other teams on the railway to undertake their duties. Restoration of the Ravenstor incline and the platform installation, and we're quite grateful for our fundraisers and also those that have helped pay for the installation of the platform up there. And again, I'm quite sure that we'll develop this in the future as well. I have the next slide now. So the projects now and the future. I've mentioned that our charity is a major stakeholder in this railway, and we're very grateful for a plan that will actually show us the direction in which we all will contribute and all want to go. We've seen that our current projects that are undergoing at the moment, the shuttle signalling project, better facilities at Wirksworth, a new steam shed to be considered, an absolute must for security and also to enable us to look after locomotives. And we'll receive more challenges in relation to this in the future because it's getting more and more difficult to source spares, of course, and we will also have the problem of obtaining coal in the future, a story in itself. Future projects, well, the extension of the Ecclesbourne Valley Railway owned rolling stock and seeing further development and further ability to meet the PLC's requirement in relation to the rakes of coaches that are needed. It's also planned to provide solar electricity from using the roof of the current diesel shed we have here to site the necessary bits and pieces to bring in income from that. And as Neil has already indicated, reduce this huge electric bill that we have on the railway at the moment, to which we all have to contribute. Ongoing maintenance of rolling stock, of course, will continue, and more importantly, continue to the infrastructure, the buildings. The station building has to be completed. There are requirements to source and assist the vegetation clearance team. New equipment is being purchased all the time on the railway, and we're contributing to this as it's identified and as the need for it increases in line with the projects that we will have to undertake in the future. Can I have the next slide, please? Sorry, can I have the next slide, please? Sorry. So we need to raise funds, and that's one of our major tasks. The sign Lord Kitchener's picture might have been a bit more appropriate here, with perhaps one of us wearing the cap. Our railway certainly needs you. And whilst I'll make just a short notice of this, anybody who does feel like donating to our railway, when all the ways that you can do it are listed on this particular site. What's important for me to say now is that we do need to be very active in fundraising, and we intend to do this. We all realise that in the years to come, that things may not be as easy as they are in the years that have gone. And we have to put our voice and our effort into ensuring that we contribute as a major stakeholder in this railway to assist with the projects that are identified that need to be completed. So if any of you do feel like donating at the end of the day, well, here's one method to do so. May I have the next slide, please? To fund the 2030 vision, we can't rely on money coming through the door just because somebody walks in and puts an envelope down on the door, on the floor, on the table. We can apply for grants, and we will look at the grant aid and the grants that are available to us, but we will have to have a positive and a very good, active, proactive attempt at doing this. We can't sit on our backsides and wait for people to come through the door anymore. The days, I think, of large legacies and things like that, well, they're going to be something of the past. We have to be there amongst those who are looking to put a bid in for grant funding quickly, and we have to be able to sell our story and sell our railway in a way that we do ourselves the best possible chance of getting grants from people. But we also will have to go out there being proactive ourselves, rattling the odd can and asking people to contribute all round. We have to realise that it's going to be a team effort, and therefore the charity will as a whole be very proactive, and we'll be looking at our other partners to point us in the direction so that we actually raise the money for the things that are needed first and the priority that they're actually needed in. Thank you. May I have the next slide, please? Money's one thing, but who's going to do the work? It's the volunteers. Yes, the PLC does have a small number of paid staff, and their efforts are backed up by the millions of hours that volunteers put in to running this railway. The majority of volunteers are, I have to say, of my age group and slightly younger, but we do need to impress upon our younger population that there's a place for them here on the railway. By the year 2030, as Neil's pointed out, in other places as well as here, our volunteer workforce will have aged, and we need to be very proactive. We currently have an injection of younger people joining the railway, but we have to work hard collectively to ensure that these youngsters come here, have a program with which to work to develop their skills, to contribute to their own personal development, and actually enjoy themselves. As all our volunteers need to be here, they need to come here and enjoy what they're doing. We have the opportunity to place them in so many different places whereby they can undertake things that they're already interested in, but also broaden their knowledge. Where we have a lack of sufficient volunteers, the only way of achieving something is to bring somebody in from outside as a contractor. This increases costs and will also increase fundraising requirements. And that's why it's very important that we sit down with this plan, we look at it, we see where we're being asked to undertake a specific project, and we fund that project. So We need the volunteers to do the work. We need the money to be able to do the work. Neil. If you want to become a volunteer, well, I'll gloss through this particular slide. You can read it later. Please don't hesitate to ring us at the railway, myself, or join through the EVR membership association. All volunteers have to join the association, but it's a document and a book which you'll find the details in which to join. You can either ring the railway station as well or contact me personally. I'm here on Tuesdays, Saturdays and Sundays, or my deputy will be, and we'll only be too happy to arrange an informal visit so you can come along and have a look at us. But more importantly, as shareholders and stakeholders yourselves, please try to encourage people you know to come along, have a look at our railway and consider volunteering with us. Neil.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric.
Right, thank you.
So I'm just going to go back to that slide to say again, for the railway to develop, it must seek funding through partnerships, agility and active management. And there we can see two very strong partnerships that are essential to the future of our railway. Agility and active management. We on the board have a challenge because we are facing a post-Mike world. On the 30th of September, Mike will be retiring as managing director of the EVR. He's not leaving the board. We don't let him leave the board. We're like the mafia. You can't leave. But he's standing down from his day-to-day activities at the railway. And that leaves challenges that the board of directors has to face up to. So we're looking for change in management direction. Since 2000, I see Mr. Miller is on this course. Since 2000, we've had to rely on a single individual, initially Martin, and recently Mike, to effectively be the managing director, keeping everything going. And that worked very well, especially in the earliest days. Small operation, you don't need many people in charge. And not only that, we didn't really have the funds. Now, I'm not saying for a second that all of a sudden we're totally minted, but you know, if you go back to 2001, 2002, we really didn't have two brass farthings to rub together. In turn, being brutal about it, the board of directors, their participation was quite limited, largely advisory, go on a board meeting every month, do a bit, come down the railway and help where they can. And to an extent as well, the board grew through personal connections as much as anything else. Now, what's happened over the past 3 to 4 years is gradually the board has morphed in shape, and we've started to bring people onto the board with the right experience and qualifications to take the railway forward into the future. And that's because the railway has become too complex a business to rely on one individual having to do everything. And if I was going to be critical, I would say that the board of directors, if anything, have probably relied for too long on the hard work of just one individual. And Mike, I thank you again for everything you've done, because there are times when you've had criticism from everybody and yet you kept the trains running. And that, I think we all should say thank you, Mike. We much appreciate what you've done. By changing our direction, the key things are, first of all, bringing in directors with professional experience. And we'll see standards and safety. So we'll be hearing from Chris Nesbitt, our standards and safety director, shortly. Civil, permanent when civil engineering, and that's Ian Allison who will be talking to us. Personnel, we now have Peter Binks, who is our personnel director. Again, an important area where we've got over 200 active volunteers and employees as well. There comes that point where you realise you need somebody to manage this in a professional and legally compliant manner. We have on the board legal experience with Mr. Oakes. Yes, you in the background, I can see you. Stop messing with your phone. And also commercial experience with Tom Tate, who gives a great deal of guidance to how we are actually expanding our offering. We're also bringing in volunteer professional advisors, again, something that certainly Ian is going to be messaging, because he's brought a number of professional engineering advisors with railway background to the railway. And finance, I'd like to welcome Matthew Sutcliffe, who is our volunteer financial controller. And we're going to come on to a little bit about what Matthew does as well. Don't worry, Matthew, you're not going to speak, it's going to be me, but welcome nonetheless. It means the directors themselves are starting to assume a far more active rather than passive role than before. And in turn, we don't think we can fill Mike's shoes in quite the same way. So we're looking to employ an operations manager to provide the day-to-day management, but there'll be far more responsibility on the board of directors for specific, shall we call them, executive functions. This diagram here, we put together, thank you, Chris, as how we see this building up. So we have the board of directors managing the business. A small number of those directors are essentially non-executive directors. So John Snell, our chairman, Mike in his post-retirement role, Tim, although he's also very much our legal expert, and Gavin Kenning. We then have a number of executive directors, so human resources under Peter Binks, infrastructure under Ian Allison, operations, engineering and safety under Chris Nesbitt, commercial under Tom, stakeholder engagement, which sounds very fluffy, which sort of suits me, but involves dealing with local authorities, almost all stakeholders, doing what I'm doing today, and also importantly, in a lot of cases, neighbours as well. And our financial controller, Matthew Sutcliffe, who really is looking at our financial systems and providing much better control and reporting. Some of those roles are employed, you can see there. So we've got a bit of a matrix that on the day-to-day basis, the operations manager will be, dare I use that awful term, will be interfacing with those other employees. But in turn, the directors are forming an important part of actually developing those people's roles. Now, on this subject, I'm now going to hand over to our operations engineering and standards director, Chris Nesbitt. And Chris, you're going to take us through a few slides about the Office of Road and Rail's annual report, because one of the things we are finding is that the days of the major coming from the inspectorate and sort of tut-tutting at a few things and telling people to pull the socks up, but that should be okay, are changing themselves with the role of the ORR. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris, who's going to say a few words about the effect of the Office of Rail and Road on our railway. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. So I put these slides together for presentation at the AGM, but we are now here. So this report actually came out literally a matter of days before our AGM, so it was quite pertinent and well timed to provide a summary of the content of that report. And it's a lengthy document, but they actually have an entire section of that devoted to the actual heritage rail sector. So they're not just talking mainline, channel, tunnel, freight, although there's including the entire report. Their rail review actually now includes an overview of the heritage rail sector. Next slide, please, Neil. So I won't go into this in a lot of detail for time, but effectively some of the overview items, the report itself is well available on the ORR's website if anybody wishes to read the entire chapter. There's about 5 pages full on the heritage rail sector. But they've identified a number of things that they see as challenges for the heritage rail sector going forward. One is the impact of climate change. Basically, is our infrastructure ready? We've already covered in Neil's presentation, and Ian will cover later, the issues of examination of structures. This is not just a heritage rail thing, but I'm actually doing some work at the moment with Network Rail. Some bridges are now approaching their 200th year in a few years' time. So, climate change is changing. Structures are moving, land is moving around them. And yes, we might only be doing 25 miles an hour, but we have roads crossing our railway in a number of places, and our railway crosses a number of the river in a few places. So are we actually ready for climate change, particularly again drainage? And clearly from an ORR's point of view, can we actually account for the condition of those assets of our infrastructure? Level crossing safety is also a key one. And again, only a few weeks ago, the ORR published their new guidance on level crossing safety for the entire rail industry. And they were again full in consultation, to which we subscribed and provided feedback. They're also now including some of the issues for the heritage rail sector to consider, particularly around level crossing siting and the upkeep and maintenance of that. So again, thank you to Mick Kingsley and the VCT team who do a sterling job every year and probably more than once a year, trying to keep the vegetation cleaned back to allow the crossing users and drivers, etc., to see people on the crossings. And also now, obviously, looking also at maintenance and upkeep of the crossing infrastructure. They're also this year quite keen to understand the heritage sector's position around COVID recovery. And I think, again, we've done very well as a railway to not only safely, but also commercially bounce back from the COVID lockdowns last year. A number of railways have suffered quite a number of injuries. And again, that's quite a good concern now with the ORR and obviously also veering into actual health and safety legislation enforcement around the workshop maintenance best practices conditions. And they've obviously found there a number of railways basic non-compliance with the safety requirements. We're also concerned with the security of the railway estate and a railway not too far away from here. A member of the public died having fallen down the embankment, and that railway was served with an improvement notice basically because they had failed to maintain the boundary fence. So again, it's whilst the actual incident nothing to do particularly with the railway. Their unfortunate incident actually was caused by the issue with the boundary fence. So something to think about. I put a few quotes out there at the side. We can read those at your leisure. But next slide, please, Neil. RM3 risk maturity management model for heritage railways. So again, people in the mail industry, we've had this around now for the best part of 10, 15 years. Last year, the ORR published a RM3 light version for heritage railways. A number of people, myself and actually Eric, sitting next to me included, have attended a number of seminars from the ORR and HRA on RM3. And it is effectively a management tool that the ORR are using right across the heritage rail sector, and it is for ourselves to use. It is being done to effectively self-assess our governance and leadership and performance across 9 criteria around the railway. So, and from those you have five levels of let's say management compliance or development, and very much they say that actually they believe most railways in that middle sector, our assessment of the sector's overall risk management found that most operators are operating ad hoc, which is the lowest, and second lowest is managed. So even the big railways are only finding that actually their level of safety management is only 2 out of 5 runs of the ladder. So one of the things that we need to look at is actually our SMS. Is it adequate in controlling risk? And obviously, following the previous slides that Neil has just shared, a significant review and update is now underway to obviously reflect the reorganisation that the business is doing. And essentially, collectively across the sector, not only the EVR, but we should be doing better. And I think the quote I put in there is that URR's findings do not indicate that the sector has made any significant progress to address highlighted failings in previous years. This suggests the sector does not yet have the capability to identify its own failings and to act and rectify them. Now, that's a pretty damning statement across the heritage sector. So it's not just on the EVR, that's 207 or 220 heritage railways that they sort of combined together. So it is very clear that the spotlight of enforce or spotlight of compliance is very much shining down from the regulator on the heritage railway movement. So we're not alone. We are one of over 200 heritage railways in the country. Each one of them is having a spotlight shone on them. Next slide, please, Neil. Okay, competency. Again, they've identified that competency remains an area of variability across the heritage railway movement, identifying training requirements, the assessment criteria that are used. And one of the things that we've developed in the last year is the rollout of HOPs for those volunteers and working members that are on the railway will now understand, and essentially we're now starting to interlock the particular competence elements to ensure that we don't have people out on the railway that actually have expired certain elements such as medicals or PTS, and essentially we can demonstrate to the ORR, should they wish to visit, that we are dealing with that in a professional manner. Carriage maintenance is another area that the ORR are quite concerned around. However, they had set about 2 years ago to start a code of practice for carriage maintenance, but unfortunately that's been delayed due to COVID. But we hope that will be rolled out in the next year or so. The big change that they see happening, and again is in its early days in infancy, you may have seen in the railway press, is now the formal establishment of the Heritage Rail Safety and Standards Board. So we have a mainline rail safety and standards board based in London that all national train operators, as part of the licence conditions, have to sign up to be a member and comply with. And we are now moving into a similar role with the Heritage Rail Safety and Standards Board. So in very simple, short language, the HRA, Heritage Rail Association, currently have a number of codes of practice, guidance notes. It is very likely that they will now become or migrate towards becoming standards. So it will no longer be optional for individual railways to comply. A number of those requirements will now become mandatory, again, as part of our membership with HRA. Next slide, please, Neil. So where does this impact on the EVR? I think it's the last slide from me. As I said before, the SMS, our safety management system, is the document, it is the binder, the volume, the file that basically underpins the entire operation of the railway. Updates that are underway. It will at this stage be a significant, again, in substance. There'll be very minor changes, but expect more to follow on a regular basis. And similarly, the rulebook last year was launched. My master rulebook that I have at home now has something like over 50 post-it notes stuck to the side and tops and bottoms of the pages, where experience and learning and incidents, feedback from users. So again, thank you to everybody that has contributed. Where we have, minor inconsistencies or variability or vague statements that actually experience has now indicated we need to update. So expect a rulebook update probably later this year or early next year. Infrastructure we'll talk about, and even we'll probably most talk about in a bit, around structures and readiness for climate change. That's quite a significant risk to the business. Competency, well, we're moving on with that. We've developed a lot in the last year with operations, competency, drivers, guards, etc. And we're now deciding to move into TNRS engineering and launch of maintenance competencies, permanent way development of competencies, and signalling. And lastly, we really use the governance and leadership elements of RM3 to really set targets now to move the business from ad hoc reactive management to a systematic managed level. And that will partially be achieved with further rollout of HOPS functionality as HOPS itself as a software system and management tool becomes fully developed. So I think it says there, so our findings continue to indicate that many railways face significant challenges to ensure they remain safe for passengers, staff and volunteers in the 21st century. Fundamental is each railway developing capability of SMS to ensure delivery of good risk control and not being complacent. And we expect railway boards and senior leaders to make this a priority as they move forwards and support and improve the culture at the front line. So that again, that is a statement that the ORR have made. That is their expectation of the Wyvern Rail board, the EVR board. We are running the railway. They're looking to us to actually set that tone of culture to ensure every volunteer, every member of staff arrives here safely and goes home safely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. And this really, again, is starting to work its way into the way the board operates. So again, don't try and look at that in detail. Up until really a couple of months ago, well, I think possibly I'll go back to last year. The arrival of COVID naturally had quite a profound effect on just how the board would meet and operate. And as you imagine, we had a 1,000,001 things to deal with. But one of them was organising board meetings online. And at the moment, we're still continuing to do that. One flexibility of using Zoom or Teams or Google Hangouts is that it makes it a lot easier to meet like we are doing now. You know, we're doing it from the comfort of our homes rather than having to find somewhere in a mutually convenient location. So we're now moving to a process of running a series of monthly management meetings. The month starts with finance. So that sort of kicks in about 10 working days into the month, which gives Matthew the opportunity to close the previous month's books. That then leads on directly to a commercial meeting where we're then reviewing the results from a commercial basis. And then we run into a series of other meetings. So those include operations, personnel, and also infrastructure. The purpose of those is then by the final Tuesday of the month to then hold a board meeting where we're hoping we're then able to provide just a summary from those meetings and the action points for the board of directors. So we're trying to make the board meetings themselves far more effective in their execution. 2 days after the board meeting comes the communications meeting. That's me. And the purpose of that then is to actually go and then make sure that we then send that message around to our volunteers, shareholders and stakeholders as well. So what we're looking to do is to move towards having a monthly stakeholder update, which not only keeps people informed, but also in a lot of cases can answer questions and in turn, frankly, try and sort of keep a cap on the rumour mill, because we all know in any organisation, a word only has to get out and all of a sudden the rumour mill will pick it up and change the story. So one critical change we've made is to bring Matthew Sutcliffe in as our financial controller. Now, about 3 years ago, we moved from the previous operation, which was literally sending a Tesco bag full of receipts to a lady in Derby who then did the books for us. We've moved away from that. So in 2018, we implemented an online finance system called Xero, spelt with an X. Many of you are familiar with Sage. Xero is another one of these systems and has proved to be very good. Because it's online, it means anybody with the permissions can actually get into it. And it's allowed us to get invoices both generated and booked in more or less real time. The system is also integrated with our banking systems as well. So the statements automatically update the account system. So we've had a lot better real-time tracking of our costs and indeed of our revenues. And there's a lot we're not using yet that we want to. So for example, creating purchase orders. I asked one or two people to give me lists of things like, what consumables do we buy? I know there's a specific oil for steam locomotive, things like that. Let's create a purchase catalogue. We can order them and we've got the tracking of what we're spending almost instantaneous. Now, that's fine, but now bringing in a financial controller has made a huge difference as well, because it is in the interpretation and the understanding and also bringing in the rigor of reporting. So two important areas are, first of all, understand the concept of closing periods off. So what's taken place in 1 month is now locked, and then the adjustments go into the subsequent month. Another one is revenue recognition. So for example, whereas previously, if we'd have been having revenue coming in for Santa's in the summer, which is a big thing, it would have gone into the summer's sales. That's not happening anymore. So any money we take from Santa, it may be received in mid-late August, but it will be recognised as revenue in December when the Santa trains run. And that's called just basic accounting, moving us from the Tesco bag full of money and receipts into a proper business-led accounting system. And that is something which is totally boring. is totally invisible, is nowhere near running trains, but is as essential to running the business effectively as it is to providing water for a steam engine or diesel for a diesel locomotive. And I thank you, Matthew, for the changes you made already, and I'm sure we're going to see many in future. Now, this in turn takes us to the world of project management, and this is an area where again, we're starting to get a better grip on what we're doing, but in turn, it means taking the burden off somebody like Mike, who has to think of everything. We need to be looking at projects in the context of our plan. How does it benefit the business? So it could be increasing turnover, it could be increasing profitability. It could be providing an asset, you know, for example, building a kitchen in the new station building that then allows us to provide with confidence high quality catering and dining services, but also to develop our volunteers and staff. And that itself feeds back to the likes of Eric Hills and Peter Binks in actually managing our volunteer base, and in a lot of cases developing them. And we've launched a lot of young people onto rail careers. So anything that is a business benefit and is a tangible business benefit can be considered as a project. Now, naturally, we then need to know two things. What's it going to cost and where's the money coming from? And that can only really take place through planning and also partnerships. And then in turn, do we have the skills in-house? So Ian will be talking about professional advisors and how, for example, you know, we need civil engineers to be able to advise us on our structures. Or in turn, if we're now looking at the steam shed, so again, have people to do ground engineering to make sure we're not going to be, you know, building the shed on top of the River Ecclesbourne and it all falls in one day, or alternatively, any risk of pollution. So again, those are all areas where we need to have the right skills, and then to try and create a clear timeline and plan and have person responsible for the project. We're taking baby steps here. Again, you can't see it too clearly, but just trying to get a list of all our projects to give them a status, to say who is responsible for them, and start to fill in the basic questions. How much do we think it's going to cost? We're not looking down to the penny, but is that going to cost £100, £1,000, £10,000, or £100,000? We need to know. Where's the money coming from? Is it coming from revenue? Is it coming from a specific capital grant that we've obtained? Is it a specific source of funding from EVR or the trust as well? So therefore, we start to get a single picture. And as you can see to the right there, quite small, but then creating project proposals. So we have a formal document where we can then track what we're doing. Now, rather than hearing me talk, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Ian Allison. And Ian, would you like to take us through the next few slides in your role of infrastructure director, where projects form a major part of your life?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Can we have the next slide? Yes, here we go. So it was quite difficult to condense the amount of things that are going on and what we want to do on the infrastructure slide into the 4 slides you'll see before us. But certainly in the future, project planning and controls, we've got to make sure that we're aware of current and future risks. And one of the key ways of doing this is the director safety tours that we have done previously. But I'm a big fan of these. It gets the operational responsible directors out on the railway and seen by the volunteers and staff. They can then be approached if there's any concerns or issues and raise them appropriately. But it's all about being out and about and looking at the infrastructure that we're responsible for. Certainly, we've got a number of standards and processes in the railway, but I'm keen that we update them to reflect the requirements of the current and future business. We've recently introduced some new standards and processes around infrastructure, but I know they want further review and additional updates. And I'm pleased to say a number of people are coming forward and volunteering their time and effort to assist me with this. So we've got documents that are clear and fit for purpose for our railway. Currently working with Mike Fairbairn on the creation of the infrastructure 10-year plan to reflect the 10-year plan that Neil has certainly spoken about. There is a lot of things to do. Certainly the review of training and compliance for all the disciplines, permanent way we're working on at the minute, and we hope to have things in place certainly before the end of 2021. As Neil's just alluded to, one master listing of all projects, so nothing gets missed. Everybody knows what's happening on the railway because we have one repository, one list for all the things that we're doing. And of course, as a result of that, we have one approvals process to comply with legal and statutory requirements, which also dovetails into RM3, as Chris has previously mentioned. Our asset management, fault recording and rectification processes are all via HOPS. We've started entering our track inspection into HOPS. Yes, there are some further development and changes to do, but we'll be doing that with the people that do the inspections. So all of a sudden, we're not putting the onerous system on them to fill out, but we work with them to find the middle ground, but to get the legitimate information transmitted in a sensible timescale and recorded appropriately. Certainly in the future, provision of materials and plant equipment to complete the planned activities is a key thing, and certainly ballast. We need ballast on this railway. If you've got any spare, please let us have it. It wants to be clean ballast, but that and plant equipment going forward will help us dramatically. And of course, we need to encourage new volunteers to join the fun. Sometimes it's very hard work, but as a team, we get so much out of the things we do on the railway, and we can stand back with pride at the things that are delivered, the projects that are delivered, and to see the railway improve and develop further from all the good things that have already been completed on the railway. Next slide, please, Neil. So permanent way, lots of things are happening, and what you see here is just what's happening this year. The team always are undertaking plan and reactive maintenance with the existing assets. They have to do the track walks to a defined process on a regular basis. But we're also searching out future track components and ballast for our improvements going forward. Our current plan is to complete 8 to 10 track panels per year. We'd like to do more, but that's with the resources we've currently got, which are absolutely fantastic. So proud of all the staff that come along in their own time and volunteer for the permanent way department and the amazing things they do. Certainly we've moved on with mechanical tamping, and we've got mechanical tamping heads, but it's hard work, and to be able to have equipment, plant equipment that takes away certainly some of the hazards and issues with regard to manual tamping has to be the way forward. We have an impending requirement with regard to the new Road 3 and extended Road 5 at Wirksworth, which we're looking to complete this year because we have to, because the amount of rolling stock that we've got and we need to move about. But certainly the immediate issue is shuttle to Hazelwood, and I shan't read this in detail, but you can see there's lots of work to be doing. There's ballast renewal and relaying in that area as well. Whilst these are the primary things, at the same time we've been looking at drainage, because I have witnessed myself in January and February some of the effects of flooding along the line and taking the photographs. So we'll be working on that to factor that work in when we do track renewal or track relaying to improve the drainage, which hasn't done bad for its 150 odd years, but we've got to think of the future. And certainly another immediate issue we've got with the permanent way is RJ. The ballast is now contaminated quite badly around there because of the water running down the road and onto the track. So I know in the next few weeks, our permanent way guys will be looking at that and see how they can alleviate things and improve the drainage on site. So that's just permanent way. There'll always be plenty of things to do. There'll always be the track inspections, but it's the maintenance of the drains, keeping them clear and considering where we can improve the drainage as well as the track. Next slide, please, Neil. Structures. we are now responsible for all the structures. I'm really pleased to announce that we've agreed with the contractor to do initial repairs on DJW4 starting in September, as per the independent inspection report that we had undertaken at the back end of last year. Certainly, we've got ideas moving forward to complete all the repairs. This really is the initial repair, the maintenance repair, to get it to a certain standard, but there's further work to do. I'm really pleased to announce, hopefully following a discussion with Ian Bowley on Tuesday on site, we're going to be moving forward to look at the ground investigations to start the construction of the steam shed going forward. I'm pleased to say that we've got a company who has offered their services free of charge to do those ground investigations, and that will dramatically reduce the price of the works around the steam shed going forward. So subject to agreeing that with Mr. Bowley on Tuesday, we'll be moving forward on that. But we've certainly had an increased focus on the current structure condition, especially now we own the structures. And the recent risk assessment with Chris Nesbitt with regard to structures from a highways perspective has identified really best practice. We should be putting bridge identification plates on the highway at the key risk bridges. Again, I'm pleased to say those identification plates have been delivered and they're ready for fitting. However, we have picked up on issues with vegetation on the bridges on the highway that I've been battling away at in the last couple of weeks to clear, but we've got some bridges that are quite dangerous during the day, so we're going to have to look at going in there at alternative times to remove that vegetation as well as fit the bridge identification plates. I'm certainly keen in the future that we develop the development of an inspection and reactive maintenance team for bridges and structures. We've got a lot of them, so I'm certainly keen to hear from people from that background who want a new challenge and may have retired from mainstream work. So anybody who you know who's got structures experience, I'd be very pleased to talk to them and work with them of how we can move things moving forward. But just on structures, I've been talking to a number of companies to be able to create industrial relationships to assist with formal inspections and reactive works. And I think I've cracked that going forward, at least with one company, but only time will tell. Next slide, please, Neil. So signaling and telecommunications, as you see, the shuttle signal box goes from strength to strength, and Tony Watt and the S&T team are moving forward with this, the structure itself. Still a lot of work to do. We've got some roof repairs to complete as soon as possible when the contractor's available to make it watertight. Now the bottom part of the signal box has come together and we've got a door on. We need to get a lot of paint on it to be able to seal it before the winter comes. But I must admit the guys are doing a really good job on that already. We continue to collect materials and equipment required from the project, and you've probably seen there's a signal turned up in the car park at Wirksworth that came late on Sunday evening. I'm still speaking to people around the country to be the swapping items that we have with other heritage railways or taking ownership of redundant materials from other companies around the UK, and we've been very successful at that up to date. There's some items that we'll never use, but certainly I've obtained them because they're a very useful commodity to be able to trade with others, and obviously in some cases either sell them or swap them out for things that we actually need for shuttle and for other sites in the future. Again, I'm pleased to say that I had a site visit with Western Power a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, it would be a couple of weeks ago, to understand the best route for the power supply, the three-phase power supply that will go into shuttle site. And we've had initial costings. Unfortunately, it won't be cheap because of a number of factors on site, but at least we know what we're aiming for now. So that is a priority moving forward. I'm pleased to say with a company that's already done some work for us free of charge at Shuttle, we'll be putting in some further signal post bases and line side structures in October as part of an industry demonstration. After the demonstration is done, the items in question will be left on site for us. So there'll be more structures going in before the end of the year. We've had a number of recovered signal posts from various places that we need to look at now with regard to cleaning them down and doing some weld repairs to install them on the bases once they've gone in. So that's all very positive. However, in the future, we've got to look at the development of the S&T teams and find a replacement team leader, because our part-time gentleman retired. Tony Watt's doing a great job, but he's intimated that he'd be keen to take a lesser role but still be involved. So again, I'm keen to find somebody with the right flair and enthusiasm and background to be able to not only move the signaling team forward, but introduce telecommunications and how we manage that along the line. And again, we are doing very well with creating industry relationships with, to assist with the project delivery. And when we get to a stage where we'll be looking at the electrical design for shuttle, there's a number of industry players that have basically said to me that they'd be willing to help and put some of their modern apprentices or graduate engineers on developing some signaling circuitry for shuttle, which is all very good and positive and reduces the cost. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, but I wanted to put these guys down, the vegetation clearance team, because they are unsung heroes. They're always there on a Monday with regard to, as it says there, the ongoing planned and reactive maintenance with existing assets as such. They're always there to react to the challenges identified by third parties, usually Derbyshire County Council, when one of our stiles or gates at a crossing across the railway has fallen into disrepair or has become rotten. They do a great job of the on-site vegetation issues along the railway. We're looking at certain user work crossings, installing markers for sighting from the crossing. So when we walk the line on a regular basis, if we can't see these markers from the crossing, we know we've got to do something about the vegetation. And instead of increasing the risk of an incident on the railway, you know, from that we can do something in a more prompt manner. The user work crossings and stiles along the railway, they continue to repair and do a great job. The control of the seasonal line-side vegetation clearance, involving machinery and so on and so forth, the flail machine. They certainly do a lot of that. However, we've got to get a bit more scientific how we record that and put it in hops, and try to begin to understand trends wherever possible with the growing season. I'm pleased to say now defects at level crossings and the majority of the infrastructure assets are going into hops. We're still fine-tuning how to get that information out and to the right people without overwhelming them with just emails and information. And before the end of the year, we'll get that right. But I'm glad to say Mick Kingsley is supporting that fact and is obviously giving feedback as to how we get it right to make it comfortable for everybody. I'm keen that these guys obviously get further tools and equipment to carry on the good work. That will certainly may involve one of the road rail Land Rovers that we've identified as being an ideal asset to get one of them back on the road and roadworthy, because that will certainly help the movement of tools and equipment, not only for the vegetation clearance team, but the rest of the infrastructure teams. And as ever, we need to increase the number of willing volunteers. I'm also keen that we look at station maintenance teams and people interested in gardening to bring them on board. The one thing I'll say before I hand over is that the main thing is when we do things, we understand what we're doing, we understand the risks. And certainly, I can't reiterate enough, some of the bigger projects we've got going forward, we've now got processes we've introduced with regard to documenting what we need, producing a method statement, and with the assistance of our professional advisors, reviewing the method of work and what we're going to do to make sure it's being done in the safest possible manner. So going forward, we need to make sure we have documentation in place to cover ourselves, but there are people available to support, so this doesn't become an onerous thing. It's all about communication and getting these projects or things we want to work above a certain size on our project plan. Thank you very much. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Ian. Very enlightening always. And yes, I will reinforce my thanks to the vegetation clearance team, the signalling team, and also to Nick and co, who do the gardening up at Worksworth Station, who have made a remarkable difference at the station as well. Okay, you'll be pleased to know we're nearly there. So how do we get to 2030? Well, I've got a couple of slides and we've got some questions. So how do we get there? Well, first of all, there are no costs or sources of funding identified in the 2030 plan. But it's worth bearing in mind, nor were there any when we published the 2020 vision document either. The plan is a vision. It's a set of prioritized objectives against which we direct all our resources, and then we seek funding. So what we have is a menu of things that we need to do, but then in turn, we then need to actually determine what goes first, and then how do we go about making it happen. Without a vision, we cannot plan. Without planning, we cannot provision. So this is the first stage. This is the move towards getting ourselves to 2030. And the things that we need to consider, because the world in 2030 is going to be radically different. And by the way, it's going to be exactly like it shows on that picture there. It's going to be exactly like that, for certain. But think about it. The internal combustion automobile will be on the path to extinction in 10 years' time. The government stated that, no new internal combustion cars by 2040, and there will be a knock-on effect on the railways as well. The proportion of more mature people in the community will increase. And it says there, by 2043, we will have almost twice as many people over 85 as we had back in about 2018 when that statement was first made. So what that means is we are dealing with an aging population and therefore aging customers. So we need to consider very hard the requirements for accessibility. Now there's a classic piece of techno speak. There will be 3.3 billion 5G IoT connections by 2030. Well, I'm sure that speaks for itself. What does that mean? Well, most of us have got one of these days. I went down to London last week and much to my amazement, actually had 5G appear on the screen. Now 5G is much faster. And IoT stands for Internet of Things. Gradually, more and more things that we interact with will be interacting with our phone and through the internet. Now that presents us with real advantages. Take, for example, Mr. Smith books his meal in 2029. He rolls in his Tesla, and we've got a camera by Worksworth Station that notes that his registration plate has just been clocked. He'd already told us what the registration was because when he booked in, he put it in as part of his form. So we now know that Mr. Smith and his family have arrived. That means we can have a personal experience. We can have somebody walk out and say, Mr. Smith, welcome, happy birthday, Mrs. Smith. If you'd like to just leave your car here, we'll park it for you. We'll plug it into the charging point. And if you'd like to come this way, you're going to travel on your nearly 100-year-old carriage for lunch. Now that opportunity is there. So do we want to be at the leading edge of that, taking best advantage with a population that is becoming progressively more and more used to using this? Or do we lag behind and say, well, we've got a website that's been down for a couple of weeks. We need to be ahead of that, and we have the brains to allow us to do that. And we must not forget the environmental pressures that we're all very clearly aware of. There are derogations. There is a debate going through the House of Lords at the moment where the heritage sector will, for example, receive derogations for the use of fossil fuels, particularly coal. But we're not going to have it all our own way. So we're going to have to think very hard about how we respond if a particular piece of legislation makes what we do today potentially illegal in the future. So once again, these are things that we will need to consider and again actively attend to. And to conclude, I'll make this statement. We need agility, collaboration, and a clear vision of what we want our railway to be. And what I hope, ladies and gentlemen, is that in this session today, you start to see the picture that we wish to project and in turn the actions that we are following. We're not perfect. I could spend another 2 hours telling you about all the things I think we do badly. Although I think if I open it up to everybody, we'll be on for the next 6 hours. So we're not perfect, but at least we have a vision and we have a plan, and I believe that's a deliverable plan. When I sent this email out, I requested some questions. I received 3, they're all quite tough ones. So I'm going to put those up and I'll be asking my colleagues to respond to them. So the first question I received was, back in 2014, 7 years ago now, the railway launched an appeal to buy components to refurbish a DMU for a permanent way vehicle. My contribution was converted into shares in the allotment of 31st of May 2014 to complete this project along with other investors. When will the vehicle be completed? As at present, this vehicle is parked in a siding at Shareholder, rotting away, or have I invested funds under false pretenses and the money has been squandered on something else? Who would like from the board to respond to that first? Would it be Mike, or would it be John, or would it be Tom? One at a time, please, gentlemen.
Hey, I'm unmuted now.
Right, John, yes, over to you.
Yes, this project has had a long gestation. We got to the point where the demands on the team exceeded the time available. The MU project unfortunately slipped behind as we concentrated on other requirements, particularly by the Railway Inspectorate, necessary to keep the running of the railway in a safe condition. Also, the project was underfunded and opportunity arising in that third round of national COVID funding for businesses to get back on their feet. It could well be that this project would fall into the line for that funding, because we have a heavy work on the permanent way, which has again been taken as quickly as we would have wished perhaps in the beginning because of the restrictions that were in place during lockdown. And our permanent way team do need something better than they have at the moment. They need to have somewhere where they can shelter, where they can prepare meals while they're out, and something that also acts as a good permanent way vehicle because it's able to tow as well as carry people. So we've got to look within the next couple of weeks at projects that could be put up for this funding. And at first pass, I would think that this would be one, but obviously I need to discuss this with Mike and the other parties involved. But anyone else like to come in on this? Stunning silence.
I'm not sure if Mike's on the call at the moment. I think he's dropped off, which is unfortunate. I think I will add something to it as well, that again, this is the importance of having a project list. So we make sure that projects don't disappear under the radar as well. I think there's always that danger that sometimes it goes from the active pile to the in abeyance temporarily pile to the big pile at the side of the desk and gradually sort of disappears. But one of the things about having active project management is making sure that doesn't happen. When the project starts, it should be on that list until it is completed and handed over and closed down. And even though it may be in abeyance, if it's on the list, it won't be forgotten. And it's an important message to get across. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. In the 2030 plan, when will shareholders be able to purchase their bonds to buy the car park from Network Rail with loans to the EVR? From memory, you're offering 4% to anyone who wishes to subscribe. The car park was to be divided into plots for stakeholding. Tom, I believe you might want to comment on this one.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Basically, we looked at this as a possibility of raising funds. And certainly we were well subscribed with over 12 stakeholders wishing to pledge £10,000 to help us to buy the small piece of land that still belonged to Network Rail. We were coming to the end of the lease then, so it was important to look at what our options were. We found that, first of all, the Network Rail were not ready to sell yet. And secondly, they were quite happy to give us a rolling lease. So it was therefore felt from the business point of view, and I'm going back to this point that Neil brought up about having a plan. People never plan to fail, but we can often fail to plan. And it would have been very remiss of myself to take on board £120,000 of debt to pay back in 10 years' time with no plan yet how we're going to raise the funds to actually pay back that debt. If I can go back to, first of all, when the railway first opened, I joined the railway during the dash to Duffield time. And that was a fantastic time for the railway. Everybody was focused on achieving this fantastic goal of the line opening to Duffield, which is about 10 years ago. And it reminds me a little bit about business and when you're looking at business development. And my experience has been in developing psychiatric hospitals for the independent sector. There are three distinct phases for business development. The first phase is you having to pay the business. And really, we inherited very little infrastructure. So we lived from hand to mouth at that time. If you think about it, we basically were very, very lucky to survive as a business initially because of the constant demands upon a finite resource. We weren't really bringing in enough capital, or sorry, enough revenue from running trains to look at the outlay that we had. But thanks to prudent management of the board then and under Martin's guideship, we ran a tight ship. And we got to the next phase, which is the phase, I suppose in some respects, when Mike sort of took over, when the business was starting to pay for itself. We were making a small operational profit, but thanks to depreciation calculations, on paper, it looked like a loss. But the business was at that time ticking along, just keeping its head above water. But I just want to share some figures with you, if I may. It's sort of hot off the press. Because the third phase is the business starts to pay you. And currently, for example, our commercial catering is about 39% up from its revenue in 2019, which is an excellent position to be in. Since the end of the sort of restrictions of COVID, we're currently in advanced bookings. We've taken £8,501 in ticket sales, with a further £10,000 for our summer pantomime. So suddenly now you can see that we've gone from that single small business that Neil alluded to a much bigger business. And I would say that summer of 2021, the business is entering into phase 3, which is it's now starting to pay some profit, and that's important to sustain. I want to share with you an example of what we're trying to do to sustain the business. The North York Moors has recently been in discussions with the HMRC to look at ways in which it can claim gift aid on one specific ticket. And that is, they have an educational ticket where they can visit anything on the site, they can travel on the train as often as they like. And HMRC have looked at this and said, well, because it's an educational experience, then we can use gift aid. You can use gift aid for that. So if we were to apply gift aid to our day rover tickets just now, that would probably increase our income by about £25,000 a year. Now that's an important figure, £25,000 a year, because during the winter lockdown, it costs about £25,000 to keep the railway open. So if we could start to look at ways in which we can work with HMRC to look at some type of educational experience, which would then attract gift aid. I look forward to working with my colleagues in the association and the trust to see if we can make it happen for the EVR. I just also want to say, each presentation has mentioned volunteers. And I think the only block just now to the commercial development of the railway is people. We've already taken on an assistant to help with the booking of trains. I looked at the phone in the office and it records the number of missed calls. And it was showing 67 missed calls. So you can imagine how many of those missed calls were customers wanting to book. So we had to do something. Hence, we've employed a commercial assistant called Helen, whose primary job will be to take bookings and ensure that we don't miss any customers. But we're becoming a victim of our own success. The railway is becoming more and more popular. And we need to attract more and more volunteers. With Peter and myself, we've opened up a very, very embryonic volunteer services department because our attrition rate's too high. Too many people come and join the railway, and then after a few weeks, they're gone. And it's much more difficult to recruit somebody new than it is to help look after somebody so they stay. So we've got to get better at looking after our resources. Two resources in the railway, really, for me: the track, which from a commercial point of view, if the track's not looked after, we have no commercial income. But secondly, the people who work and volunteer at the railway. And I look forward to working with my colleagues in both the trust and again the association, so we can deliver much better, joined up, cohesive services to the people who are helping to sustain our railway and take it forward. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And the third and final question that we received in advance was this. Steam facilities aside, hopefully in progress through EVR, will the railway be aiming to increase the workshop, shed and pit space for DMU, carriage and loco restoration and maintenance, given the increase in the running fleet? Where will these be located? Will steps be taken to ensure future development is not hampered by poorly thought out infrastructure works in the short term? How would these be financed? Would it be grant applications, lottery, shareholders, EVR? Who would lead and coordinate such projects? At present, there seems to be little drive from management or directors to support and progress efforts to improve these present facilities, even with the offer of financial assistance. That's quite a punch to the stomach there. But Who from the board would like to answer that? I'm looking particularly at my more youthful board members. I can add a couple of things. That's certainly, yeah. As an engineer, I make a great economist. So, and you'll never see me getting my hands dirty on the railway because I just don't know what to do and it'd be dangerous. But it's quite clear that the maintenance facility we have at the moment, although expanded, needs more work. There's work taking place at the moment to put down a further concrete floor to allow loco jacks to be installed. And I, for one, have certainly noticed that there's now space behind the maintenance facility where some form of facility could be placed in there. So in other words, either a small machine shop, because at the moment our machine shop effectively is a container, possibly also some form of welfare facility. But all I'm saying is we have space there.
Can I just say, Neil?
Sure.
That running a railway is a very complex operation, and complex problems require joined up solutions. And the only way that we can tackle this is to get the best of everybody who's working on the railway, who's volunteering on the railway. Bring the people together and let's look at that. Let's look at how we can bring in finances to support the project. Because there's also sponsorship, which we haven't tapped in on yet. So for me, it's about bringing the best of the railway together and moving forward.
Thank you, Tom. Ian, I notice you've just come online. Would you like to say something as well?
Yes, just the fact that this whole process of moving the yard forward will be starting in earnest on Tuesday, when myself and Ian Bowley meet up to begin the discussions to move this forward and to begin sorting out when we can undertake ground investigations with the kind offer from a third-party organisation. So watch this space. I've already said to the rest of the board, as you well know, Neil, that I want to take this forward on behalf of Wyvern Rail, and I'm more than happy working with Ian, representing EVR, to do this jointly and be very, very open about what we're doing and the timescales we're working to.
Lovely, thank you, Ian. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, John, go ahead.
Question. The focus was on non-steam. Draw your attention to one of the things that Neil put in his presentation, and that's our interest in developing facilities at Shottle, if we can come to an accommodation with the existing landowners, because we are very tight for space in Workspace for loco restoration and even carriage work. And if we can expand into Shottle, that will give us the opportunity to have much better facilities for what the questionnaire has said in his first paragraph.
And just to add to that, John, the fact that we're looking to put a three-phase power supply into that site, and we're on with it now, merely demonstrates our commitment to develop the Shottle site. But we certainly need to get power and services into that site before we start any form of restoration. And we all know that takes time and money to achieve. But we've already started that journey, I'm pleased to say.
Okay, thank you both very much. Now, one of the advantages of being the meeting host is that I can see all the pictures of people. And I notice everyone's starting to get a bit, I've been here for 2 hours now and all the rest of it. So I think we're probably getting pretty much, I mean, that really is the end of the formal part of the presentation. And by the way, I just want to show that picture was taken last year when Ian and his merry men had just plonked the signal box on its legs at Shottle. Here is a picture I took the weekend before last of the same box, and it's now been clad at the bottom, and since then it's moved on further because it now even has a door there. So one thing that I've often heard people say about our railways, every time I come I see something different, and I think that really is just sticking to it. Is there anybody on this call at the moment who has a particular screaming question that they would like to ask? You're always welcome to come back to me. Once this finishes, apart from the fact I'm going to go, basically Zoom and YouTube are then chuntering away and saving a recording of this. So this will be available on YouTube. I'm sure that's going to be entertaining watching. So you can always see it again. But in turn, I will be following up with each and every one of you on this with a follow-up email and a link to or an attachment with the actual report itself that we've published. So therefore, if you do have any questions, please do come back to me. But at the moment, does anyone have any immediate questions they would like to ask? I think silence is golden. Okay, in which case, I'm going to thank you all very much indeed for joining us. I hope you have found this a worthwhile and interesting presentation. As I say, we're not perfect, but I like to think that we have got a way forward, and I think it's having that forward view that is going to give us our strength in the future. So on that basis, if I may, I'm going to bring this meeting to a conclusion and say, please feel free to contact me or any other members of the board with any questions that you have, and we will endeavour to answer them in the best possible way that we can for you. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I look forward to doing another one of these before very long. Thank you, and good afternoon to you all. Bye-bye.